Hey, welcome back to the Wednesday night Bible study. Last time we started to look at a prophet in Judah named Habakkuk. Isn't that a fun name, Habakkuk? We did talk about what little we know about him. But the book of Habakkuk writes of a conversation between himself and God. Things were not looking good in Judah. A series of bad kings, and the people of Judah continued their wickedness, and that has Habakkuk upset. Also, enemies of Judah are getting stronger and more threatening, and we'll learn more about that today. So Habakkuk begins asking God questions. What I'd like us to focus on in these few weeks is how this applies to us today. I'm thinking of 4 things that we should consider for growing in our relationship with God. And I began a list last time with a pretty lofty title called Takeaways from Habakkuk's Conversation with God, or Good Advice in Our Growing Relationship with God. So we then read Habakkuk's first complaint to God, and I'll read it again. It was this, verse 2 through 4. How long, O Lord, must I call for help, but you did not listen? Or cry out to you, violence, but you did not save? Why do you make me look at injustice? Why do you tolerate wrong? Destruction and violence are before me. There is strife and conflict abounds. Therefore the law is paralyzed and justice never prevails. The wicked hem in the righteous so that justice is perverted. So why do you, God, make me look at injustice? And why do you, God, tolerate wrong? How can you call yourself a righteous God if you see evil and do nothing about it? So Habakkuk is burdened with this. What does he do? He talks to God. He wants God to do something. He wants him to intervene. But he doesn't just let it fester. He talks to God. Did he go too far? Did Habakkuk go too far in his complaint to God? Is that something God forbids Habakkuk to do? Well, judging how God responds, apparently it's not a problem with God. So God started out saying, look at the nations and watch and be utterly amazed, for I am going to do something in your days that you would not believe, even if you were told. So God doesn't find Habakkuk's questions out of bounds. And that took us to the first takeaway. The first takeaway in this conversation is to speak, is the advice. Speak to God. Tell him your burdens. Ask questions. He may not always give you the answers. He might not do it right away either. He might not give you the answers you're expecting. But he will listen to your burdens. Okay, continuing with what God has to say. First off, Habakkuk's complaint was essentially rhetorical questions. How could you do this? How could violence live? But God does answer him, and we see that God is not indifferent. God is not insensitive. And we're about to see that God has not been idle. And that's what he's going to let Habakkuk know. He was already at work on specific plans. His plans had a purpose to discipline the people of Judah. Let's continue with verse 6 then. I am raising up the Babylonians, that ruthless and impetuous people who sweep across the whole earth to seize dwelling places not their own. So what does God want Habakkuk to watch for? What will amaze him? God is saying that Judah will be judged by God through the Babylonians. The Babylonians is who he was going to raise up. Well, this is news. As a matter of fact, we can see in the history of how God dealt with his people that God was using 2 giant world superpowers to discipline his people. The northern part of the kingdom, which was called Israel, the northern half of the nation, they were lopped off by the great nation of Assyria. Assyria came and took them away. That was in 722 BC when Israel was invaded. So that took care of the north by a great superpower coming in. And now, Judah is the southern part of the nation. God was bringing the great nation of Babylon, even greater than Assyria, down to finish the job by destroying the southern half. In 605 BC, Babylonia had just destroyed the Egyptian armies that had marched north of Israel to try to stop the southward advance of the Babylonians. This Egyptian defeat and the rise of Babylonia would not be new news for Habakkuk, and would not be good news either. So we will see, if you look at the history, Babylonia not only did take Judah, which was just kind of like a small little thing, but they actually took over Egypt. They took over Assyria. They became the world power. Okay, but what is God talking about? The result is that Judah's sin would not go unchecked. Justice was not dead. Discipline was forthcoming. Correction was on its way. Habakkuk had been asking for this, and God was delivering. But who God would use for that discipline, that was the big surprise. So we next get God's description of the Babylonian warriors in verses 7 through 11. Let's read those. This is the Babylonians, God speaking. They are a feared and dreaded people. They are a law to themselves and promote their own honor. Their horses are swifter than leopards, fiercer than wolves at dusk. Their cavalry gallops headlong. Their horsemen come from afar. They fly like a vulture, swooping to devour. They all come bent on violence. There's more. Their hordes advance like a desert wind and gather prisoners like sand. They deride kings and scoff at rulers. They laugh at all fortified cities. They build earthen ramps and capture them. Then they sweep past like the wind and go on. Guilty men whose own strength is their God. Quite a poetic description of this ruthless, evil place called Babylonia. The Babylonian army is on the move. And now we come to Habakkuk's second complaint right after God said this. In verse 12, Habakkuk says, O Lord, are you not from everlasting? My God, my Holy One, we will not die. So there he's showing reverence. He's showing respect to God. O Lord, you have appointed them to execute judgment, them being the Babylonians. O Rock, you have ordained them to punish. Your eyes are too pure to look on evil. You cannot tolerate wrong. Why then do you tolerate the treacherous? Why are you silent while the wicked swallow up those more righteous than themselves? You have made men like fish in the sea, like sea creatures that have no ruler. The wicked foe pulls all of them up with hooks. He catches them in his net. He gathers them up in his dragnet, and so he rejoices and is glad. Therefore he sacrifices to his net and burns incense to his dragnet. For by his net he lives in luxury and enjoys the choicest food. Is he to keep on emptying his net, destroying nations without mercy? Okay, there's a lot of stuff in there. He is kind of almost beating around the bush, but he's saying, hey, is it true you're using the Babylonians, who are even more evil than what we are seeing in Judah? They are the ones who are going to be the discipliners. So he had a complaint now from God's answer. Like I think Habakkuk would like to have said, you might want to send us a plague, maybe a plague to be disciplined. But you're planning on using the Babylonians. They're more wicked and godless than we are. If anyone deserves a punishment, it's the Babylonians. But now apply this today. Isn't it the same for all of us at times? First we say to God, come rescue me. And then ask, aren't you going to deal with this situation? But when God begins to solve our problem in a way we didn't expect, we might say, I can't believe you're going to do that. Or you've got to be kidding, God. Sometimes it may seem like God doesn't care, or even that you've been forsaken, or even that evil is winning. At times we may even find it hard to worship or trust or serve a God whose ways seem so contradictory to what we expect. God's will clashing with our understanding or our will. But here you've got to give Habakkuk credit. He speaks to God of his concerns, and that's what God wants, a relationship where we can go to him. But then he does something that's a good reminder for us. He doesn't turn his back on or stop believing in God. Instead, we read Habakkuk says in the first verse of chapter 2 now. We're going to go into chapter 2. This is Habakkuk speaking to God. I will stand at my watch and station myself on the ramparts. I will look to see what he will say to me and what answer I am to give to this complaint. So there's Habakkuk saying going to his watchtower to pray, to meditate, to essentially wait on the Lord. He is patient. This is a good model, waiting on the Lord, being patient. Not easy to do, is it? God then speaks to that in verse 2. Then, because Habakkuk waited and listened, the Lord replied, write down the revelation and make it plain on tablets so that a herald may run with it. For the revelation awaits an appointed time. It speaks of the end and will not prove false. Though it linger, wait for it. It will certainly come and will not delay. And this all brings me to the second bit of advice. We had to speak, and now we're looking at waiting, to wait. Just like Habakkuk said he'd wait at the watchtower, he would trust in God and wait. Just as God told Habakkuk, though it linger, wait for it. God said it would certainly come. We can count on him. We can trust him. Whatever it is that's troubling us might take time to resolve, and we may be totally surprised at his method, but it's good advice to be patient. It's good advice to wait. But even before waiting, if we're not listening, we can't always hear what God wants to tell us. So listening is a big part of this too. Listen and wait. So we're going to continue next time with more of the conversation. In the meantime, take care, and may the Lord be with you.